Imagine waking up and the world outside your window is already blue, not the pale grey blue of a northern morning. This blue is alive, turquoise close to shore, sapphire where the shelf drops away, and in the shallows, something closer to glass than colour. This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, scattered across the Atlantic like a handful of stones cast gently into water. From the bustle of Nassau on New Providence Island, a city that never quite sleeps, to the remote silence of a fishing village on Andros, where the only sounds before dawn are the breeze and the distant call of a wood dove. Most people imagine the Bahamas through the lens of a resort brochure. Palm trees, cocktails, swimming pigs bobbing in the turquoise shallows of Exuma. And yes, all of that is real. But beneath the postcard image, there is something else entirely. There are people who have lived their entire lives here. On the Family Islands, the out-island settlements, the coastal villages where everyone knows your name and your grandmother's name before you even introduce yourself. And there are people who left, were shaped by other cities and other rhythms, and chose to come back. Because something about these islands holds them in a way that no other place can. What is it really like to live in the Bahamas? Not to visit it, not to escape to it for a week, but to wake up inside it, every single day. We are going to travel through these islands, from Nassau and Freeport to the quiet interior of Eleuthera, the fishing communities of Long Island, and the sacred hills of Cat Island. We will look at the food, the faith, the family, the economy, the storms, and the silence. And by the end, you may find yourself asking a question you did not expect. Why would anyone want to live anywhere else? Let us begin. The Bahamas is not one place. It is a collection of places that happen to share a flag, a language, and a sea. The archipelago stretches across more than 100,000 square kilometers of ocean, yet its total landmass amounts to just over 5,000 square miles. That contrast, enormous ocean, modest land, defines everything about life here. The islands run in a broad arc, beginning just 50 miles off the coast of Florida. If you traced a line from the northernmost tip at Walker's Cay all the way down to Great Inagua near the coast of Haiti, you would cover nearly 700 miles. Grand Bahama Island, home to the city of Freeport, sits in the north, flat, forested, and shaped by American investment that essentially built it from nothing in the 1950s. It is more commercial, more structured than most other islands. To the south lies Andros, the largest island in the Bahamas and one of the least known. Dense pine forests, tidal creeks, blue holes that plunge hundreds of feet into the earth, and the third largest barrier reef in the world running the length of its eastern shore. Eleuthera stretches like a thin ribbon, barely 2 miles wide in places, for over 100 miles. On one side, heavy Atlantic waves. On the other, a calm, pink-tinted turquoise from centuries of coral ground into the sand. Off its northern tip sits Harbour Island, famous for its pink sand beach, ranked among the most beautiful in the world. Then there is Exuma, the chain of mostly uninhabited cays familiar from social media and luxury yacht itineraries. But the Exuma mainland, Great Exuma, is a community of working people, fishermen, and families who have lived here for generations with little interest in being photographed. The climate is subtropical, warm, almost always. From December through April, the weather is among the finest on the planet. From June through November, hurricane season arrives. This is not a theoretical risk. It is a lived reality, written into the architecture and the cultural memory of every Bahamian family. The land itself is limestone, thin, porous, difficult to farm. Fresh water is scarce. Almost everything consumed in the Bahamas arrives by boat or by plane from somewhere else. This is the environment that shapes Bahamian life. Beautiful and generous in some ways, demanding in others. The rhythm of a day in the Bahamas depends enormously on which island you are on. In Nassau, the day starts early and loud. By 6 in the morning, the main roads are already filling with traffic. Nassau is home to more than half of the entire Bahamian population, roughly 250,000 people, concentrated on an island smaller than many American counties. The morning rush is real. For working families along Carmichael Road and the western suburbs, the school run and the commute form a sequence of effort and patience that would feel familiar to anyone in a busy city. Freeport carries a different energy, calmer, more spacious, streets wider, settlements less dense. People in Freeport often describe their city as a place still deciding what it wants to be next, particularly after Hurricane Dorian reshaped so much of Grand Bahama in 2019. On the Family Islands, the smaller communities scattered across the archipelago, the day unfolds at an entirely different pace. There is no rush hour on Long Island. Life here is governed more by tide and weather than by calendar. Fishermen are on the water before the sun fully rises. Across all the islands, the day very often begins with the church. The Bahamas has one of the highest concentrations of churches per capita in the world. Faith here is not a private matter. It is woven into how time is organized, how grief is managed, and how celebrations are framed. In the afternoons, especially outside Nassau, life slows deliberately. The heat encourages a different relationship with time. There is little point rushing when the sea is not going anywhere. Evenings in the Bahamas belong to the community. Porches matter here. Open doors matter. People spend evenings talking across fences, sharing food, watching children play in the fading light. There is a sociability to Bahamian life, a genuine warmth toward neighbors that runs deeper than tourism marketing has ever managed to capture. Home in the Bahamas is not just a structure, it is a statement of endurance. Walk through the older neighborhoods of Nassau, Grantstown, Baintown, the historic streets south of Bay Street, and you will find wooden houses with louvered windows and wide verandas, painted in faded pastels. Yellow, turquoise, coral, colors designed to be bright against the bleaching tropical sun. Houses here are built low, rarely more than 2 stories. This is structural intelligence. A low building with a strong roof survives a Category 4 wind system far better than something tall and ambitious. In Nassau today, the housing landscape has fragmented. Colonial-era homes share the skyline with concrete block constructions, gated communities, and informal settlements that house much of the city's working poor. Housing is expensive relative to local wages, pushing many families into multi-generational arrangements, grandparents, parents, and children sharing the same home. Multi-generational living is, in fact, one of the defining features of Bahamian family life. The extended family shares not just a home, but often a street. Neighbors are treated as family, elders are genuinely respected, children are collectively watched over. On Abaco, before Hurricane Dorian, there was a strong tradition of home ownership, carefully maintained communities that took visible pride in their buildings and settlements. When the hurricane destroyed so much of that, particularly in Marsh Harbour, it was not just property that was lost. It was memory, identity, the accumulated physical record of who a family had been for generations. The families who stayed and those who returned speak about it consistently in terms of belonging. This is home. The story continues here. On Cat Island, one of the most sparsely populated islands in the Bahamas, the sense of home is almost elemental. The island's hills are unusual in this otherwise flat nation. Mount Alvernia, rising 63 meters, is the highest point in the entire country. People here describe their relationship with the land in terms that sound almost spiritual. They are not from the Bahamas in general. They are from Cat Island specifically. There is a difference, and they mean it. There is a saying among Bahamians, if you want to understand a people, eat with them. In the Bahamas, food is an act of identity. The national dish is conch. This large sea snail, its shell painted in spirals of cream and pink, has sustained communities for centuries. Conch can be eaten raw in a salad with lime juice and diced vegetables, fresh and sharp and oceanic. It can be cracked and fried, golden in hot oil, served with peas and rice. Or it can be stewed slowly, forming the base of soups that appear on tables across every island every Sunday afternoon. In Nassau, the Arawak Cay fish fry is legendary, a stretch of open-air stalls along the western waterfront where Bahamian families have gathered for decades to eat, argue about which stall has the best cracked conch, and let the evening unfold without urgency. Beyond conch, Bahamian cuisine reflects the full layered history of these islands. Spiny lobster grilled over coals on the beach in Andros or Bimini. Johnny cake, dense, slightly sweet, cooked in a cast iron pot, on breakfast tables across the Family Islands. Souse, a tangy lime broth, consumed on weekends as both a meal and a remedy. On Eleuthera, the pineapple holds a particular place. Smaller and sweeter than any commercial variety, celebrated every summer at the North Eleuthera Pineapple Festival, an occasion that draws Eleutherans scattered to Nassau, Miami and New York back to eat their island's food and remember who they are. Culture in the Bahamas is inseparable from music. The rake and scrape tradition, played on a carpenter's handsaw, a goatskin drum and an accordion, is the folk music of the Family Islands. On Cat Island, the Rake and Scrape Festival reaffirms every year that this sound has not been replaced by streaming services or imported pop. And then there is Junkanoo. If you understand one thing about Bahamian culture, it should be this. Teams spend months designing elaborate costumes of fringed crepe paper and wire, rehearsing choreography, composing original music. On Boxing Day morning and New Year's Day before dawn, the streets of Nassau erupt. Drums you feel before you hear, horns and cowbells in rhythms of impossible complexity, costumes that shimmer under streetlights in colors you did not know cloth could hold. Junkanoo is resistance transformed into art. It is the Bahamian soul on the street in full color at 4 in the morning. Here is something that surprises many people who visit the Bahamas and fall in love with it. For all its natural beauty, it is an economically narrow and expensive place to live. The Bahamian economy rests on 2 pillars: tourism and offshore finance. Tourism alone generates roughly half the country's economic output. Every hotel on Cable Beach in Nassau, every charter boat out of Bimini, every all-inclusive resort on any island feeds into a system the country depends on almost entirely. This dependency creates real vulnerability. When tourists stop coming, as they did during the pandemic, the Bahamas contracts. There is no industrial base to fall back on, limited agriculture, no oil, no manufacturing. For the working Bahamian in Nassau, most available jobs are in service: hotels, restaurants, retail, security. These jobs are real and necessary, but often low-paying relative to cost of living. Nassau routinely ranks among the most expensive cities in the Caribbean. Rent is high. Electricity is expensive. Groceries cost more than their American equivalents because almost everything is shipped in. In Freeport, the story is more complicated. The city was built on a vision of free trade zones and diversified commerce that largely did not survive beyond its early decades. What remains is a city with the infrastructure of ambition and the pace of a community still finding its next chapter. On the Family Islands, Long Island, Acklins, Crooked Island, the economy is smaller, simpler, and in some ways more resilient. Fishing is still viable. Small-scale farming feeds local families. There is less cash, but also less of the grinding urban cost of living that makes Nassau so difficult for ordinary families. Abaco, before Hurricane Dorian, had one of the more diversified out-island economies. Boat building was a proud tradition. Commercial fishing was strong. The hurricane reshaped all of it, and the recovery has required rebuilding economic foundations alongside physical ones, simultaneously. The brain drain is a real concern. Many of the most qualified young Bahamians, having studied at American universities, find that opportunities in Miami or Toronto are more numerous and better paid. The pull of home is real, but so is the pull of economic possibility. This tension between the love of home and the limits of what home can offer sits at the center of the Bahamian experience today. To understand how Bahamians live together, you need to understand one word: community. The church remains the primary social institution in Nassau. Hundreds of them, Baptist, Methodist, Anglican, Pentecostal, occupying every neighborhood, from the grand historic Christ Church Cathedral on George Street to the small painted chapels in the southern parishes. Sunday in Nassau is a different city. Morning is quieter, punctuated by gospel singing drifting through open doors. Families dress carefully for church. This is not casual attendance. It is a weekly act of commitment to faith, to community, and to the simple dignity of showing up well. What happens after church matters just as much. The Sunday meal is sacred. Extended family gathered, neighbors who have become family through proximity and habit, children from nearby who end up at the table without anyone questioning it. The food is prepared with care. The meal extends into the afternoon, unhurried. On the Family Islands, social life organizes even more tightly around shared events. Regattas are not merely sailing competitions. They are the social highlights of the year, occasions for homecoming, for dancing, for the settling of old arguments. The Long Island Regatta and the Cat Island Regatta draw people from across the archipelago and the diaspora, Bahamians living in Florida or London coming back to remember who they are. Sport is another organizing force. Athletics has given the Bahamas its greatest international triumphs. The Golden Girls, the women's 4x100 relay team who took gold at the Sydney Olympics in 2000, remain national heroes. Shawnee Miller-Wibo, the sprinter from Nassau who won gold in Rio and Tokyo, is not merely a sporting achievement. She is a symbol of what Bahamian ambition looks like at its most incandescent. Music binds all of this together, not just at Junkanoo, but in the everyday. In the bars of Nassau, in the open-air cookouts of Andros, in the rake and scrape sessions on Eleuthera that start in an afternoon and outlast the stars. What Bahamians do with their Sundays, their festivals, their leisure, speaks to a people who have never confused economic difficulty with a diminished life. And now, we need to say something harder. Because this documentary would be dishonest if it only showed you the blue water and the Junkanoo costumes and the Sunday meals. On September 1st, 2019, Hurricane Dorian made landfall on the Abaco Islands as a Category 5 storm, one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded. It stalled over Grand Bahama and Abaco for over 2 days, delivering winds of nearly 300 kilometers per hour and a storm surge that swallowed entire communities. Thousands of homes were destroyed. The people who lived there lost not just buildings, but the accumulated objects of their lives: photographs, furniture, the small material record of who they had been. The recovery has been real, but uneven. Nassau received attention. The Family Islands, as so often happens, received less. The pattern is familiar in island nations. The capital concentrates resources. The out-islands wait. Climate change makes this worse. Most settlements sit barely above sea level. As sea levels rise and storm intensity increases, the physical vulnerability of these communities grows more acute. For people who have lived on Eleuthera or Long Island for generations, the question of whether the land their great-grandparents farmed will exist for their grandchildren is not hypothetical. It is a source of genuine daily anxiety. There is also economic inequality. The Bahamas has one of the highest per capita incomes in the Caribbean, driven upward by a relatively small number of very wealthy residents and a large offshore finance sector. But median income tells a different story. The gap between the luxurious resort Bahamas visible from Paradise Island, where the Atlantis complex sprawls across a man-made bridge connection to Nassau, and the daily economic reality of a working family in the southern suburbs is stark. Crime in Nassau is a concern that Bahamians speak about with a mixture of frustration and resignation. The city experiences gun violence at rates disproportionate for its size, concentrated in specific communities and tied to economic desperation. These are not comfortable things to say, but they are things that every person who lives here knows. And knowing them is part of understanding what it actually means to call the Bahamas home. Something is shifting in the Bahamas, quietly, through the accumulation of small decisions taken by individual people over time. The generation in their 20s and 30s today is the first raised entirely with the internet, the first for whom Miami is a 40-minute flight. Many were educated abroad or have family abroad. They know the world, they compare. In Nassau, this tension plays out visibly. The city carries all the markers of American suburban life: fast food chains, shopping malls, social media culture. The traditional rhythms, church on Sunday, rake and scrape on Saturday night, neighbors calling across fences in the evening, coexist uneasily with a generation that communicates by text and orders dinner by app. Freeport, with its more commercial history and its long-established communities of Chinese, Lebanese and Greek Bahamians who arrived in the 1950s and 60s, leans into modernity more readily. On the Family Islands, on Long Island and Cat Island, the pace of change is slower, but not absent. Young people leave for Nassau, or for America. They take with them the knowledge of how to fish and build, and come back with ideas. Village populations are aging. The fishing boats are still there, but fewer young hands are willing to take them out before dawn on a cold morning. Eleuthera has become a particular focal point for a different kind of modernity. Small-scale sustainable agriculture and conservation projects have taken root there, drawing local young Bahamians alongside foreign settlers who see opportunity in its space and natural beauty. The tension between newcomers and long-established local communities is real. Questions of land ownership and cultural integrity remain actively debated. The traditional Bahamian home, open to the breeze, is increasingly being replaced by sealed concrete block and air conditioning. The old relationship with the sea, the knowledge of tides and fish migration and weather read by cloud formation, is being held less tightly with each new generation. This is the universal story of small places encountering global culture and trying to hold something of themselves intact in the process. What they are trying to hold is worth understanding, because it is remarkable. We return now to the question we asked at the beginning. Why would anyone want to live anywhere else? Ask someone who has spent 20 years in Nassau, who has dealt with the traffic, the cost of living, the heat and the storms, why they stay, and the answer rarely involves rational calculation. It involves something older than logic. It is the light, the specific quality of light in the Bahamas, particularly in the late afternoon, when the sun is low and the water catches it in a way that is simultaneously ancient and entirely new. There is no color in the world quite like Bahamian water in the late afternoon. People who have lived here their entire lives still stop and look at it. It is the familiarity. There is a quality of being known, not famous, not seen in any grand sense, simply known. Your family has been here for generations. The people you grew up with are still nearby. In a world that asks people to be mobile, rootless, always available for relocation in exchange for a slightly better salary, the Bahamian attachment to place is a quiet act of resistance. It is the beauty, unavoidable, every single day. People here go to the beach not because they are on holiday, but because it is Tuesday and the water is blue and the hour is free. On Cat Island, where the hills rise and the ocean is visible from every high point, or on Long Island, where the sea on both coasts is never more than a short walk away. The relationship between people and their physical world has an intimacy almost impossible to describe. The land and the sea here are not backdrop. They are participants in daily life, and above all, it is the community. Bahamians who return from abroad cite this most often. They missed the warmth, the ease of interaction, the assumption of hospitality, the porch culture, the shared meals, the social fabric woven through church and festival and sport, and simply being outside, together, in a place where the climate permits that for most of the year, without effort. These islands have been continuously inhabited for more than 1,000 years. The Lucayan people were here before Columbus. The enslaved Africans who were brought here, who survived and built and made culture from suffering, are here still, in the names and the rhythms and the faces and the music of the people. The fishermen who mapped these reefs by memory, the families who farmed limestone soil and made it bloom, they are all here in the architecture and the food and the language. The Bahamas is not just a place, it is a story that is still being written, and the people who live here are its authors. If this journey into the Bahamas has moved something in you, if you found yourself wanting to know more, to see more, to understand the world's hidden places a little more deeply, then subscribe. There is so much more world left to explore.